Long before anyone planted a crop, built a wall, or invented a single word for God, a group of people carried red pigment for miles, ground it into powder, and rubbed it onto a corpse for no practical reason at all. It didn't make the body last longer. It didn't feed anyone. It didn't protect the living from a single predator. And yet they kept doing it, over and over, for tens of thousands of years, across continents that had no contact with each other. So here's the question nobody has a clean answer for. Why would a species obsessed with survival waste time, energy, and resources on something that does absolutely nothing for survival? The honest answer is that it wasn't wasted at all. It might be the single most important thing early humans ever did. Let's start with a myth almost everyone believes, because it's the one taught in school. The standard story goes like this. Humans got smart, invented farming, built villages, got bored, and then invented gods to explain thunder. Religion as a luxury, something you get around to once survival is handled. That story is backwards, and the evidence proving it wrong has been sitting in the ground for over a century. Start with the ochre. At Blombos Cave on the South African coast, archaeologists have pulled out engraved pieces of red ochre dating back roughly 100,000 years, along with a processing kit, abalone shells used as mixing containers, charcoal, bone tools for grinding pigment into paste. None of this made anyone warmer, fed anyone, or killed anything. Ochre has no nutritional or defensive purpose whatsoever. What it has is color, and color, applied to a body or a tool or a wall, is a symbol. It's information one mind is sending to other minds. The moment a species starts painting things for no material reason, you're looking at the birth of a brain that believes meaning can exist beyond the physical object in front of it. That's the exact cognitive leap religion requires. Now follow that leap to the graves. At Skhul Cave in modern-day Israel, roughly 100,000-year-old remains were found with a human jawbone still clutching the tusk of a wild boar, deliberately placed there, not fallen in by accident. Marine shells, pierced and strung, likely worn as jewelry, were buried alongside multiple individuals at the same site. A wild animal doesn't do this. A chimpanzee doesn't do this. When a mother chimp loses an infant, she may carry the body for days out of confusion or attachment, but eventually she simply leaves it. No object is added. No preparation is made. Human graves, by contrast, are staged. They contain choices. And every choice buried with a corpse is a message about what the living believed was still needed on the other side of death. Here's where it gets stranger, because this behavior isn't limited to our own species. In a cave in Germany, researchers have documented Neanderthal burial sites where pollen analysis initially suggested bodies were covered in wildflowers, and while that specific detail is debated, what isn't debated is the deliberate positioning of Neanderthal remains in fetal or resting postures, arranged rather than discarded. Neanderthals split from our lineage roughly 600,000 years ago. If both branches of the human family independently developed the habit of treating the dead as something more than garbage, the behavior likely isn't a cultural accident either species picked up along the way. It's something closer to a shared piece of hardware, present in the brain before the two species even separated. So what is that hardware actually doing? This is where cognitive scientists point to something called agency detection. Early humans who heard rustling in the grass and assumed it was a predator survived more often than those who assumed it was just the wind. Being wrong in that direction costs you nothing. Being wrong in the other direction gets you killed. So evolution built a brain that defaults to assuming intention behind ambiguous signals. A shadow might be a person. A sound might be a mind. This system worked so well for spotting real threats that it never learned to switch off. It started firing on thunder, on drought, on disease, on the sun disappearing during an eclipse. Nothing in the physical world was allowed to just happen anymore. Everything had a will behind it, because the brain that assumed a will was the brain that survived long enough to have children. Once you believe the wind has intentions, you're forced into a new kind of relationship with the world, because you don't reason with weather. You negotiate with it, the same way you'd negotiate with a powerful stranger. You offer something. You show respect. You avoid offending it. This is animism, almost certainly the oldest religious framework humans ever built, and it turns a chaotic, indifferent universe into something that at least makes emotional sense. A world run by hostile spirits is terrifying, but it's a kind of terrifying you can plan around. A world with no explanation at all is worse. But belief in unseen minds did something else, something that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with each other. As human groups grew past the point where everyone could personally track everyone else's behavior, a new problem showed up. Cheating. In a band of 30 people, stealing food gets noticed immediately and punished by the group. In a settlement of 300, a thief can vanish into the crowd. Anthropologist Ara Norenzayan has spent years studying what he calls moralizing gods, deities who don't just exist, but actively watch, judge, and punish bad behavior even when no human is around to witness it. Norenzayan's cross-cultural research found a consistent pattern. Societies that developed belief in watchful punishing gods were able to scale into much larger, more cooperative populations than societies without them, because the fear of divine punishment did the policing that face-to-face shame used to handle in smaller groups. You couldn't get away with cheating a stranger, because something was always watching, even in the dark, even when you were completely alone. This is where the field genuinely splits into two camps, and it's worth understanding both, because neither one is settled science. The byproduct camp argues religion isn't an adaptation at all. It's an accidental side effect of useful mental tools, agency detection, theory of mind, pattern recognition, tools built for entirely different jobs that just happen to generate belief in spirits as an unintended side effect. The adaptation camp argues the opposite, that shared belief in watchful gods was actively selected for, because groups who believed it cooperated better, fought harder, and outsurvived groups who didn't. Both camps agree on one thing though. Whether it was an accident or a strategy, once it existed, it worked, and it spread. There's also a physical cost side to all of this that rarely gets mentioned. Shared ritual isn't free. Fasting, scarification, painful initiation ceremonies, hours of chanting until your voice gives out. Researchers studying costly signaling theory have found that rituals demanding real sacrifice function as a kind of proof. Anyone can claim loyalty to the group. Far fewer people will voluntarily endure pain or hunger to prove it. A ritual that costs something filters out people who aren't actually committed, which means the groups practicing the most demanding rituals ended up with the most reliably cooperative members, and cooperative groups simply outlast groups riddled with free riders. And there's a biological payoff hiding underneath all of it. Synchronized movement, chanting, and group ritual trigger a measurable flood of endorphins and oxytocin in the human brain. That chemical response lowers stress, increases trust, and makes strangers feel like family, at least temporarily. Chronic stress, left unmanaged, wears down the immune system and shortens lifespans. A framework that gave ancient humans a sense of control over disaster, alongside a regular dose of bonding chemicals delivered through communal ritual, wasn't just emotionally comforting. It may have kept people alive longer and healthier in an environment that offered no other form of relief. There's another piece of evidence that rarely gets connected to any of this, and it's hiding on the walls of caves most people only think of as ancient art galleries. Deep inside Skhul Cave in southern France, painters roughly 36,000 years ago crawled hundreds of meters past the reach of daylight to paint lions, rhinos, and horses with a level of anatomical precision that still impresses trained artists today. But the choice of location is the strange part. These weren't painted at cave entrances where people actually lived, cooked, and slept. They were painted in total darkness, in chambers you had to crawl through narrow passages to reach, carrying nothing but a handful of animal fat lamps. Nobody paints a masterpiece in a pitch-black crawl space for decoration. That kind of location is deliberate, and it matches something anthropologists see in cultures around the world today, the idea of a threshold space, a physical boundary you cross to reach the world where spirits live. Going deep into the earth to paint an animal wasn't just art. It was very likely an act of communication aimed at something the painter believed could see it, even in total darkness, even with no human witness anywhere nearby. That instinct to reach toward an unseen audience shows up again and again, in different forms, across every culture archaeologists have ever studied, which is itself a kind of evidence. Isolated tribes in the Amazon, nomadic herders in Mongolia, and farming communities in the Pacific Islands developed almost none of their beliefs through contact with each other, yet all of them arrived at strikingly similar concepts: unseen forces with intentions, an afterlife that mirrors or extends this one, and rituals meant to keep the relationship between the visible and invisible world in balance. When completely disconnected populations keep inventing the same basic idea independently, that's usually a sign the idea isn't coming from culture at all. It's coming from something built into the hardware every one of those populations shared before they ever split apart. Here's the detail that should genuinely surprise you. For most of the last century, historians assumed organized religion came after agriculture, a comfort built by people who finally had leisure time. But large-scale ceremonial sites built by hunter-gatherers, people with no farming, no permanent homes, no domesticated animals, keep turning up in the archaeological record, built purely for ritual purposes, centuries before anyone in those regions planted a single seed. Feeding the crowds needed to build and maintain those gathering sites may have been part of what pushed nearby groups toward deliberately cultivating wild grain in the first place. If that timeline holds, belief came first, and civilization was partly built to sustain it, not the other way around. You still carry every piece of this machinery, whether you believe in anything or not. You knock on wood. You avoid the number 13. You whisper a small bargain to no one in particular during turbulence on a plane you have no control over. None of that comes from a religious education. It comes from software installed long before religion had a name, back when a rustle in the grass was either the wind or something that wanted to kill you, and guessing wrong only ever happened once.